Good morning. We'll call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Scott Howard.
Present.
John Postick.
Present.
Michelle Dean.
Present.
Jonathan Housel. John Joyce. Don Kapersik. Barbara Lawson. Dana Templeton.
Present.
Mike Voorhees.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Item 2, approval of the minutes.
I'd like to move to approve the minutes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
That was Postick approved, or made the motion, and Templeton seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'll
Minutes.
abstain.
Pardon?
I'll abstain. I wasn't here.
Okay. Minutes approved. Item 3, cases withdrawn, none. Item 4, continuance request, none. Item 5, consent docket, none. And item 6, cases for individual consideration, SRCA-19-00006 at 1500 Exchange Avenue, Unit B.
Good morning. My name is Michael Philbrick. I'm a planner in the Urban Design and Current Planning Division Planning Department, along with Laura. This application is for a case located on 1500 Exchange Avenue, which is just to the west of the Oklahoma River and east of South Indiana Avenue. The case involves renovation of the building with a variety of doors and windows being changed out, parking lot improvements, signage, lighting, landscape improvements, as well as fencing and screening being installed. The 3 major issues associated with this application as it was submitted are that the project does not comply with the required parking lot landscaping requirements, the street tree requirements, or the sidewalk requirements along Exchange Avenue. And we've outlined for you in the staff report all 3 of those provisions and cited the applicable code sections that relate to those requirements, and provided for you our analysis of why we feel that the variance requests associated with those improvements should not be approved. And that's fine. This is a summary of some of the signage that's being proposed, and then later on we have some shots of the surrounding businesses. This is a shot of the existing site. You can see in the front there is the 2 street trees here, where 4 are required based on the frontage that the project has. And then along this side, the west side of the building, this is the western driveway. You can see the parking. There's parking located in this area, but with the change in use, the code requires compliance with the current landscape requirements for parking lots. And that's just a bunch of various points required, and trees and ground cover and islands and so on and so forth, and they have proposed not to do that. So in summary, we have at the end of your staff report provided 2 recommendations to you. One is to require approval of the project with 3 conditions. 1, that we receive a revised landscape plan that shows compliance with the street tree requirements. 2, that we receive a revised landscape plan that shows compliance with the parking lot landscape requirements. And 3, that we receive a revised site plan that shows compliance with the required sidewalk requirements. Secondarily, there is a recommendation, because a variance request is involved, that the committee provide a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment recommending denial of the 3 variance requests. So in your motions or in your actions today, you would be making two separate motions, one on the project with the conditions of approval, and secondarily a second motion that would relate to your decision on the kind of recommendation you want to make to the Board of Adjustment with regard to the variance requests. That concludes our presentation. We're prepared to respond to any questions the committee may have.
Thank you for the presentation. I see the applicant is here. Would you like to address the committee?
Yes, good morning. My name's Rob Elliott with Elliott Architects in town. Our request today is on behalf of the Emerald Group, who has acquired the property to complete a medical marijuana grow house facility. And with us today is Mr. Ray Tinsley and Ed Walker of the Emerald Group. They'd be able to answer any questions regarding particular operation or concept of the project. But you didn't bring any samples, I don't think. I don't see a green bag. So to give you a little background, we had, after acquiring the property for development, the group acquired permits for a new dispensary. The permits were acquired. This is all interior renovation. This used to be a lumber warehouse office facility. So there was an interior finished space that was turned into a dispensary office operation. All the work was complete, certificates of occupancy issued, and the dispensary is actually now open and operating. The next phase of the project will be to make the improvements on the interior of the warehouse for the grow house facility itself. And associated with that, because of the age and previous use of the building, we found that there are a number of improvements that need to be made to the exterior of the building that affected the exterior appearance. There's a few overhead doors that are to be removed and replaced with siding to match the existing building. There's some bollards that we need to place on the outside for security and protection of the building. There's some fencing that we need to do and new gates that we propose to put in. These facilities require a lot of air conditioning, so we'll have some air conditioning condensers to place, and part of that is screening those new condensers that are ground mounted. So all of those are in the packet, I think, that you've reviewed, and part of the staff report that recommends those items are in compliance with the Riverfront guidelines. The items that we aren't in compliance with, as Michael said, have mostly to do with some of the landscaping site development requirements, which in our view are achievable, but maybe not appropriate or intended for the specific site that we have, because of these new requirements seem to be came later in the code than the building and site were developed. So those, primarily number one, the parking landscaping. Our parking, if you can see from the diagram, is primarily adjacent to the building, and it's an angled site. So we've determined that's the west side of the building. We have a few parking places on the east side of the building, which is a shared common egress corridor with our neighbor to the east, which is the CBS building supply store. So the parking lot landscaping requirement, our parking is really remote from the corridor, Exchange Avenue. If we were to introduce the parking lot landscaping, which I understand would be like a parking island with landscape material and tree in it, there would be our parking at the northwest corner of the building for a certain distance is going to be accommodated by the tree and landscape, the existing tree and the landscape material that we had planned in that area. So I think that what I determined that we may have one parking space on the west side of our building that would be required to be a landscaped parking island. Its setback from Exchange Avenue would be such that it would really not be of benefit or add to the street or neighborhood character while still meeting the requirement. So in looking at I think there were three items to describe the intent of the landscaping and screening regulations, so A, B, and C in the packet. And it was just our view that even if we had a landscape parking island, it wouldn't do anything to while it would meet the intent, the literal intent, it wouldn't see it from the street. You would not see the landscape improvements. So we're requesting a variance. Understand it's a code item. It's a variance that we'd be requesting from the Board of Adjustment on that one item. The second one is the street trees. Yes, our frontage is 164 feet long. We have two existing street trees. They are, the caliper on those existing trees is about 14 inches from what can be measured. I believe they are Bradford pears. I think they were planted many years ago, most likely to meet a code regulation. While our frontage is 164 feet long, there are two drives that serve the property on the west and east sides, if you will. And the development of the drives leaves us 100 feet of grassed area across the frontage that you can see in the picture. If my property, and this is speculation, if my property was actually 100 feet long, I could place two trees in that 100 feet and meet the requirement. We can place another tree in the frontage. What we have chosen to do was actually put a sign on the front of the building, which is in the packet. If we placed more trees on the frontage, it would hide the building more, and it would push us in the direction of signage-wise to put a different type of monument sign out to the front. So this is a simpler way that we think will meet the needs of building business signage and still meet the character of the neighborhood. These trees, or I don't think we have a full overhead view. If you were coming across Exchange Avenue going south, there are no trees on the right side of the street. I think all the way up to Pennsylvania. There's no trees. On your left side going south, the east side, I guess, of the road, we have the first trees. It could be about perhaps a quarter of a mile across the bridge until you run into these first two trees. There's one more tree to the neighbor to the south, and then the next block, where the residential area starts, there are more trees. So the trees that we have, I think, are in keeping with the neighborhood. They do not meet the literal requirement of spacing 40 feet on center, but that's why we are asking for the variance for the Board of Adjustment. The sidewalk is most interesting. I always thought that I was the last one to know. We got a note yesterday from a construction company who is announcing the Stockyard City Sidewalk construction project. I think they met Ray to start this morning. So they haven't been to the site this morning. Maybe the bulldozers are there. But there's apparently a plan to build a sidewalk along the Exchange corridor that is starting today. So I guess we need to figure out a little more what's going to happen with the sidewalk. From our perspective to start with, we have, there is no connecting sidewalk there at our site. We concur with that. There is a sidewalk to the south that serves the residential neighborhood. There is somewhat of a sidewalk on the other side, west side of Exchange Avenue. That sidewalk on the west side of Exchange Avenue actually connects to the sidewalk side of the bridge. There is no sidewalk on our side of the Exchange Avenue bridge. So while a sidewalk is obviously going to be built, can be built, there are utility lines overhead, there's a fire hydrant out in our front yard, there's a couple of water valves, there's a sewer line in the front, but we don't think it's going to interfere with any front yard development. So we had planned on asking the Board of Adjustment for that variance also. That's really our proposition.
Thank you for your presentation. I guess I would like to just clarify, I guess, with the Scenic River Overlay District, a lot of times these districts are developed to help revitalize areas of our city that are growing and coming back to life. As far as the trees, the street trees, do they not have the flexibility to group them? They don't have to be a regimented spacing?
The only criteria in the code for the street trees is that there's a maximum 40-foot on-center dimension. So they could be clustered, but clustering is a tricky thing depending on the type of tree you're planting and the space that you need for the crown size of each tree species. So.
Okay. And then as far as the sidewalk, again, that's something that, with a revitalized district, I think improving pedestrian safety and maneuverability throughout an area is very important. It also increases or improves walkability.
And just to address, I had no knowledge of a sidewalk project. They need a CA for that. We haven't had an application submitted. I'll check into it.
And which side of the street is it on?
I know, because I know they're saying this Stockyard City, so we will check into this. It says they're building 4 miles of sidewalk. Obviously, if a sidewalk was planned and we had known about it, and it was going to be in this area, we would not have included that requirement, but we'd have to look into this.
There's some existing, as you can see in the pictures, some existing boulders that are on the corners of the driveways that serve the properties. And the conversation that Ray had yesterday with the construction gentleman was that, do you want to move your boulders or do you want us to move your boulders? Because we're building a sidewalk. So whether he's right or wrong, I don't know. But that's the obvious intent, to be on our side. Maybe the other side also.
Michael, could you clarify if the existing tree species are in line with the city street tree species requirements?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. I don't know what the species is.
I think they are.
I would agree.
Mr. Elliott, do you know if they are or not?
Well, I think they're, I've heard, I haven't looked at the list, but I've heard that the city doesn't like Bradford pears as they did 25 years ago.
It would be my reaction to this, that if they're not permitted in the current street tree landscaping city requirements, that they not count towards your 4 required street trees. And in addition to what Chairman Howard said, if the intent of the Scenic River Overlay Design District is to gradually improve the overall quality of the entire area, then it's incumbent upon each of the individual property owners to take a little piece of that, a little step forward. And so the fact that there's no street trees further down Exchange Avenue is the reason why this Scenic River Overlay Design District was put into place, so that property by property, eventually it would become a tree-lined corridor. That's stated pretty explicitly in the Overlay Design District guidelines. So in my opinion, it's pretty critical that as each property is improved and the overall value of this district is enhanced, that each property do their fair share and take a little part in improving that portion of the corridor.
The only pear that I see on our street tree list, and I'll say this wrong, it's the Callery, C-A-L-L-E-R-Y pear. However, normally we give them credit if they have a tree out there. It might not be on the list, but obviously if they were to plant a new one, they would have to come off the list. So Bradford pears aren't on the list. They're not a popular tree with
Also, I would ask if there is already a sidewalk being constructed, would you be amenable to withdrawing your application for a variance, since if one is constructed, you would not require a variance?
Sure.
Okay.
I just have one other comment about the parking. And Rob, I know you're an architect and designed a lot of projects throughout Oklahoma City. As far as the parking, I mean, that's a standard requirement for almost any new building or office building or retail, that you have to have a tree or landscaping within 75 feet of any parking space. So is that not correct?
Oh, yeah, I understand that. Oh, I understand that there are code requirements, yes. Yeah. It seems like in the development of this property, it's just, we're looking at many times where there's a parking lot or parking as part of the frontage of the building, associated with the streetscape, that the trees are good. Well, not only well-intended, but serve a purpose for the community. The orientation of our building and the parking and where we would be allowed to place that tree doesn't seem that it would have that connection. I mean, if it's a requirement, it's a requirement. We're just, and it's not that large of an expense to do, but it would not be beneficial, in our opinion.
The parking lot landscaping requirements, while they may not, depending on the location of the parking lot and its visibility of the parking lot from the street, would have some beneficial impact to the streetscape. However, that's not the main requirement. That's not the main purpose of parking lot landscaping. Parking lot landscaping is to improve and enhance the feel and presence and appearance of the parking lot, not the streetscape. So in addition to making the parking lot look nicer, it also provides other benefits such as reduction of heat gain because it takes out some of the asphalt, provides some shade, although a limited amount when you only have one tree within 75 feet of any stall, and some relief from the concrete expanse of the parking lot. So it's really not, the landscape requirements for the parking lot are really not geared to enhance the streetscape. It's to enhance the parking lot.
Does the committee have any other questions?
Regarding the parking lot landscaping, we recognize it's a code requirement, and we recognize what its value is generally. We thought that it would not be necessarily required. No, that's not the right word. We thought it really wouldn't be any beneficial to the project. Is why we were approaching it for the variance. However, we don't want that to be in the way of approval of our overall request. We understand that the staff recommendation is that a variance for the parking lot landscaping not be recommended to the Board of Adjustment, which is fine, but we just wanted to know that we can still go ahead with the improvements that you do approve while we go to the Board of Variance. So I wasn't sure how the process worked there. I didn't want one item like the parking lot tree to stand in the way of progress for the project.
I have a question. What is the fee for applying for a variance?
I think it's $1,200.
And so what is the price of a tree?
Depends on what tree you buy.
There are no other questions. I would entertain a motion, and keep in mind we'll be voting on two different items, item 1 and 2.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the application on the basis that the project complies with the regulations and guidelines of the Scenic River Overlay Design District zoning ordinance as referenced in section C and D of the staff report, with the conditions that the applicant submit a revised landscape plan that shows compliance with all applicable street tree requirements, that the applicant shall submit a revised landscape plan that shows compliance with all applicable parking lot landscaping requirements, and that the applicant shall submit a revised site plan to show compliance with all applicable sidewalk requirements.
Just for clarification, I think there was discussion about not including that last requirement now that we know that there is a sidewalk project or not. So I don't know.
Was it clear that it really is? We have.
Well, I have no knowledge of it, but they were specifically contacted about their rocks that they have at the street, that they're going to have to be moved because they're coming in. I have the city staff person's contact information now, so possibly maybe we could add to that one saying, obviously, that if there is a city project to put in a sidewalk, that would not be a requirement for them.
Laura, just to clarify my motion, it was my intent that the point you brought up would be addressed in the second motion regarding our recommendations to the Board of Adjustment, and that the application before this board be subject to an actual confirmation of a sidewalk plan.
Okay, yeah, because if the city's doing this, they're not controlling it, and they wouldn't even have any of the drawings on
Sure.
it. So I didn't know what we ought to.
And that may involve some solicitation of drawings from whoever is doing
Right.
it, or more
Okay.
information from whoever's in charge of doing the
Right,
sidewalks.
just to confirm there is going to be a sidewalk, is what you're saying.
That's right.
Okay, I got you.
We can't approve it, in my opinion, we can't approve it without any kind of addressing that sidewalk requirement.
Thank you.
Sure.
I second the motion.
Joyce, did you second it? Okay. All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion. Vote on item 2. As far as Board of Adjustment request. Oh, yes, I'll entertain a motion.
I would make a motion to provide a recommendation of denial to the Board of Adjustment for variances from the street tree requirements and parking lot landscaping requirements. Like a suggestion from my fellow board members of how to address the sidewalk issue in this recommendation. Or city staff, you have a recommendation? It's a challenge because we didn't know anything about this ahead of.
Yeah, how could they build a sidewalk without, yeah.
If there is a city project going through that is going to be putting in a sidewalk, and it would not be appropriate for there to be a variance from the sidewalk requirements to go before the Board of Adjustment.
Do you believe it would be appropriate to just not address
I
the
think you
sidewalks to the Board of Adjustment?
You could still recommend denial if that's what you choose, just in case there is not a city project,
Okay.
that's already addressed, and it wouldn't have to come back here for a recommendation.
Okay, then let me clarify my motion. I move to provide a recommendation of denial to the Board of Adjustment for variances from the street tree requirements, the parking lot landscape requirements, and this project if no information on the sidewalk is provided.
Should we tell the contractor to stop?
No?
We formally have no information on this. You have no certificate of appropriateness on this. It's all we have is a postcard, and someone out there we don't know if they're going to back bill you, or we don't know if it's a scam. We don't know what it is. So
There's a city employee contact information on that card that's in charge of the project. I've got that information. I'm going to get in touch with him when I get through with this meeting. It's not unusual for the design districts to not be part of the loop when they're working on projects such as sidewalks. It's more common in Scenic River just because people forget Scenic River's so huge. But it does happen in most design districts, so.
Okay, we have a motion.
He did ask a question we may need to respond to. Do we tell the contractor to stop? And
I think that was answered, no.
I mean, no.
I don't think
Yeah.
that's within our authority.
Yeah, I don't think you have the authority to tell him to stop either, do you?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
With these motions, can we proceed with the other items in the application?
Those would be the building improvements to the...
Removing the overhead doors, replacing the bad
Yes.
panels?
These just address the landscape.
Yeah, the meeting the motion that was approved was to approve your application with the conditions that you submit revised landscaping plans and site plans. So all the other elements that we didn't address were approved.
Okay.
And just to be clear, if you are not successful in obtaining a variance from the Board of Adjustment on the landscaping requirements and the sidewalk requirements, those are things you would be required to do under the code regardless.
Right.
We were just discussing that, yes, they could go forward. Obviously, we could make them revise the site plan now to show everything. However, we feel it's more appropriate to wait until after they go to the Board of Adjustment. And so if the Board of Adjustment supports your motion for denial, then they'd come back with revised stuff. If the Board of Adjustment, which they can do, agrees with their request not to require it, then they're not out anything because they haven't had to submit us a new drawing. So we won't hold them up on the project.
Understand. Yep. Just want to make sure.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Voorhees, second. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 7, other business.
Jeez. Hello, I'm not usually at this microphone. Lisa is out of town. Otherwise, you'd be getting a presentation since she worked on this project. City staff feels like we've been working on the small self project forever. We haven't had many applications in Scenic River, but we probably will at some point. So you might hopefully remember from our committee and commissioner training that we had back in January that Lisa rolled out, we're working on this. And so we're now to the point where we've got the ordinance. The presentations are being made at all design districts, and there's a lot of those, in anticipation of then heading on to the Planning Commission and City Council. And we're very lucky because our own Assistant Municipal Counselor is actually one of the experts on their staff now on small cells. So that's very helpful to us. So most people are familiar with the great big cell towers that are ginormous, and everyone is always worried about those if they're next to your house. So the small cells, you might not even recognize that's what they are. So they're typically in the streetscape, and a lot of times they're on top of a streetlight pole or a utility pole. But what we have happening here, and this is just an example of an application we got that's literally down the street. It's at Hudson and Main Street. This one is not going in, unfortunately. Well, they were going to have to move it because we would not agree to that current location, but the AT&T said, no, we're going to have to totally move it. So I don't have an actual one in place to let you know what they're going to look like, but they're roughly 30 feet tall, and they go in the streetscape, so they're out there with the street trees and the street lights, traffic lights, benches downtown, that kind of thing, and so they're part of the streetscape. While initially we were hoping that that wasn't going to be the case, the state has passed some legislation that allows them to legitimately go in the right-of-way within the streetscape. And that ordinance, that bill became effective last year on November 1st. And so this basically tells us that if we have regulations for anything in the streetscape, we can include small cells with those. Like if we say, well, bus benches can be there or whatever, we can use the same type of regulation. We can't create new ones just for small cells. So city staff has gone through and we looked at our design districts. Some of them address streetscape improvements better than others. And so there were meetings with Verizon and AT&T, who are the two current companies that are being submitted applications, and went over this with them. We've had at least 2 meetings with them. Everything has worked very well, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to codify what we've been doing in practice, which is letting them know where they can be located as far as, if you have on-street parking, we don't want them to interfere with getting in and out of a door. If you have a sidewalk and they want to stick it right smack dab in the sidewalk and narrow the sidewalk down to less than 5 foot or 6 foot, no, we need to kind of shift it over. So they've agreed with what our concerns have been. Obviously, utilities have different concerns, and that impacts the location of these. So we have to be careful, because you've got the state law and you've also got federal regulations on these. So this is one in another city that might or might look like, although this one looks green, the only choices we currently have here are black and silver. We ask about green because they want to put one by the ballpark, and they don't have green ones. So they've agreed that whatever the streetlight poles are on that street, if it's metal or if it's wooden, they'd match it, and whatever the predominant color is. A lot of times it's black, such as in Automobile Alley, they have black streetlights, so if they put them there, and I have approved a few in that area, they're going to be black. Some of the streetlight poles are silver or gray, so they're going to be that color to match them. So as I was saying, it's Senate Bill 1388, that's what went into effect last year. It's a permitted use. That was right. And they're allowed in the right-of-way all throughout the state. So the approach, as I said, we're looking at, they're going in the streetscape. So here's our streetscape, and how are we going to accommodate them within that area? And sometimes there isn't room for them because of everything that's already there. So those are the types of things we're having to look at. We're doing it so it can go through staff. Originally, a couple of years ago when these came in, it was in downtown, we went to the committee, and that got extremely complicated. I think they've gotten easier since then. So we are encouraging co-location so that you have more than one on a pole. However, we are not so sure in practice that's going to work out, because when they're only 31 foot tall, can they actually go on the same pole? But co-location can also be, you've got an existing street light, and if they can work out a deal with either the city or OG&E to go on the street light pole, that's great, because that's also co-location. We've had some go in on wooden power poles in alleys where you have OG&E facilities. That's also co-location. So that's a win-win. So we've got one of the issues that we realized early on is some of our design districts had a lot more guidelines and or regulations on stuff in the streetscape. We had a few that had like almost nothing, and that includes Scenic River. The main issue with Scenic River is almost every single zoning district that you have in the city, you can find in Scenic River. So if there is something that's in a zoning district, they're all different, because we go from ag to residential to office to commercial to industrial. So that is an area where we had to actually, and you're going to see a screenshot here of, there's more stuff being added in Scenic River just because we didn't have anything. So here are all of our design districts, and some people might forget that we have so many. So there are provisions that are common to all that talk about things such as, well, if they're going to replace it, at first we thought we don't need to get involved with replacements, but then we thought, what if they were in the wrong place to begin with? What if they were the wrong material? Maybe they were wood and they should be metal. So we kind of backed off of that, and it's like, well, we kind of need to get involved if they're replacing a pole. But if they're going on an existing pole, they don't need a CA from us. We had to add to the list of amenities that are allowed in the streetscape, benches, trash cans, that kind of thing, streetlight poles. We had to actually add the small cells to those lists. We also needed to make sure that we authorize staff to issue the CA, because we're doing these administratively in the majority of the districts. That one I will tell you that's a little different because of their regulations and their guidelines is the HP districts, historic preservation, and I will defer to Laura in case, but I think in that case, some of those end up going, will they still go to the
No, those should still be administrative.
administrative? Okay, because we've had some more of those. So, I mentioned Scenic River had almost nothing about the streetscape, also stockyards and the urban design. And those are the overlay districts, didn't. And so there had to be more added to those. So they actually had to establish new streetscape guidelines. So here's an example, even though we don't have to read them all. And it's taken from Scenic River, that all of this stuff had to be added because we didn't have anything addressing that. Because in Scenic River, as we just heard, we've got an area where you don't have a lot of sidewalks, you don't have a lot of street amenities, you don't have street trees, so we're just now in some areas getting that. So this is the type of information I mentioned, poles, matching color of other poles, that's in here, that type of thing, matching the material and finish. Now, in historic preservation, they actually have their own standards and guidelines book, so it's not part of their ordinance. And so the revisions they're making are going in that book. The rest of the design districts, it's going in their ordinances where you have the regulations and the guidelines. So the schedule is May and June that we're headed toward the end of that. It's being presented to all the design districts. I think you're maybe 3 or 4 that's been presented to at this point. In July and August, the plan is to go to the Planning Commission, and then August, September to go to City Council. We are lucky in that the small cell providers that we've been working with have been working with us and have been very accommodating. Even though we didn't have regulations in place, they're still going by these, and we tell them things. They have to get a revocable permit. That's usually when we're put on notice that they're submitting it because they're going in the right-of-way. So they get a revocable permit, and in most cases, they get a CA. So hopefully soon we'll have some of these that go up so people can see them. I think Verizon's are going to look a little different than AT&T's, but they'll be pretty similar, and it'll almost be like it's another streetlight pole in there. They're about 8 inches in diameter to 12 inches in diameter. So what we're looking for here is making a recommendation to the Planning Commission on this amended ordinance. Sorry.
Thank you for the presentation, Laura. Certainly glad to see the Planning Department be proactive on this new site amenity. And I would encourage co-location when possible to avoid pole clutter.
Yes, we recommend that. We can't make them do that, but I do know some of them, they've approached the city to locate. They wanted to locate on traffic lights, and we're like, no. That's not me, I'm sorry, Public Works said no. And I believe most of the street light poles are actually OG&E, and I think they've been trying to coordinate with them. But the wooden poles, I've seen that happen. So we've got that going on in a few locations in downtown at the moment. The only small cell, to my knowledge, that's in Scenic River, and unfortunately it slipped through the cracks. So they got a revocable, and it never was brought to my attention, and it went up. And it is on Southwest 15th Street, right across from where all the hotels got built. And when it originally went in, it was in front of the newest hotel on the north side of the road. And because of the complaints, Public Works made them move it across the street, and it is a really tall wooden pole. It should have been a metal one, but that's kind of water under the bridge. So that's the only one that I know of that we've got right now in Scenic River.
Any other questions? Would entertain a motion.
I would propose approval of the motion.
Do we have a second? Voorhees seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, item 8, communications. A, administrative approval report. Nothing? Okay. Item B, comments from planning staff.
We will probably let you know next week if we're going to have a meeting next month. I appreciate your attendance. I kind of had a panic mode yesterday when I'm like, uh-oh, Paula's gone, we have a meeting tomorrow. And I started counting, and I'm like, well, it says we have exactly 5. That's why the email went out, so I appreciate you all attending. And
Thank you. Item C, comments from committee members. None. D, next meeting date. Again, we'll wait and see if we have one.
Yeah,
But that would be
it's-
July 3rd if we were to have one.
correct, we're hoping not, because we had to reschedule that one to the Wednesday because obviously the 4th is a holiday. And I know sometimes people are out of town around holidays like that, but we'll let you know next week.
Okay, all right. Well, call this meeting adjourned.
Thanks, you too. Stay dry.
I know. Now, what is it he does? Oh, surely he can find a job here. Yeah.
It's like Laura says, on these projects like this, we never get drawn into the loop at the very beginning of the process. Yes, yes. Some sway, finally. Right. Oh. She was supposed, her last day over there was supposed to be Friday. But her office is not ready here, so she's not coming over yet, so.
walking sidewalks, the